Hello, everybody, and welcome to Round the Table.
Yes, it's Round the Table, your favourite slow TV radio podcast from the meeting point for students of English, not only in Bilbao, but throughout the world. And in this week's programme, we've got a lot of what's the difference questions for you. We have a very small pronunciation problem. We have the return of our celebrity guest speaker with his monologue on this week's topic, which was change. And at the end, we're going to have a rather complicated little grammar lesson for you. First of all, we have to tell you that we are a bit out of sync this week. Due to the bank holiday on Friday, you may be listening to this and thinking, what? The topic is change? We haven't discussed that one yet. That's because you're from a Friday group. The other classes this week have been discussing the topic of change. So if you're in a Friday group, you will be 1 week behind. So you'll be listening to the podcast before you have the discussion. So let's see how that works. It might be better for you. I don't know. So let's dive into the programme this week with a little bit of what's the difference? Our first pair of words are exam and examine. Examine is a verb. To look at something very carefully, especially if you are a doctor, you might examine the patient. But you sit an exam when you are studying. So exam is probably the word you're looking for, but a lot of people use examine when they mean exam. The next one is an old favourite of story and history. Usually if it's just a narrative, a little anecdote, you're telling a story. History tends to be things from a long time ago, or it could be something that covers a long period of time. So you could have the history of an organisation or a company if you talk about the beginning of it all the way up to the present day. That could also be the history of something. But generally history is kings and queens and battles and Romans and ancient Greeks. That kind of thing is history. You're probably just telling a story. Titles and qualifications. If you sit an exam, if you pass the exam, you'll have a qualification. The title that you have is only if you can add something to your name. So if you are called the Duke of Bilbao or the Marquess of Alaba or something like that, usually titles are given to you by the monarch of the time. But I suppose if you could put the word professor or doctor in front of your name, that would also be a title. But if you've passed an exam, you've only got a qualification. The first certificate Cambridge exam is not a title. You don't use it as part of your name. Here's a little threesome here. Sanity, sanitary, and sanitation. Sanity in English is normally used to refer to mental health. If you are insane, that kind of thing, we're talking about your mental health. So sanity is in your head, not in the rest of your body. Sanitary is normally referring to cleanliness. So we need sanitary conditions if you're performing an operation. And if things are very unsanitary, we're talking about, well, as people perceive medieval times when they emptied their toilets into the street, which they didn't really do. But if they did that, that would be very unsanitary. So sanitary is talking about cleanliness normally. Sanitation is referring to toilets and that kind of thing. How the wastewater is disposed of. Okay, so that is sanitation. Envy and jealousy are very closely linked. If you think of jealousy being more emotional, envy being a bit more material, these do switch over quite a bit. You could be jealous of your neighbour's big car. Maybe envious might be a better word. But if you're talking romantic issues, if a boy sees his girlfriend talking to another boy, that's going to be jealousy, okay? Because that's an emotional thing. That's definitely jealousy. But these two are very closely linked. Find and find out came up in the week. If you find something, it's just locating an object. Find out, when we use the out there, this is another one of those modifying particle things. Find out is when you're looking for information. Okay, so you don't find out your keys, you find your keys, and you find €5 in the street, as I did the other day. I hope it's not yours. So that's just find, when you come across an object or you're looking for an object. Find out is when you're looking in a book for information, or you're looking on the internet to find some information. Another interesting group of three here: speak, speech, talk. Now, speak is always a verb. Speech is the noun related to the verb speak. But speech can also be used in two slightly different ways: the uncountable one and the countable one. So if it's uncountable, it's just the ability to speak. We have the power of speech. We can communicate through speech. I'll come back to the countable one in a minute. Talk could be a verb. Okay, he was talking to his friend. Or it can also be a noun, a countable noun. A talk. So then we have a countable noun, a speech, and another one, a talk. If you give a speech, you stand in front of a large group of people and you speak to them, obviously. But then a talk is also the same thing. A speech would be more to impress people. If a politician is standing up in the parliament, or if the king, say, is addressing the people in, as the King of England recently did in the American parliament, or whatever it's called, he gave a speech. A talk is very similar, but a talk is more educational, maybe at a big conference, that kind of thing, where you're sharing information. So it could be educational or more informative about something. That would be a talk. So the talk might be more to convey information, whereas a speech might be more to convey an opinion or to persuade people, that kind of thing. But they are very similar. Research, investigation. Scientists do research, they don't do investigation normally. Maybe sometimes that we use that, but I don't think so. I think of police when I'm thinking investigation. There's a criminal investigation, scientific research. In shape, on form. We were talking fitness. When someone's in good condition, you might say they are in shape because they go to the gym regularly. On form, not quite the same thing. If you are on form, means you are performing very well. So it might be you're playing a sport particularly well. You might say, wow, he's really on form today. Or it could be that you're just entertaining your friends and you're very good at telling jokes. They might say you are on form. So it means you are performing very well. And that is the end of our What's the Difference? Now let's have a look at our quote of the week. If you see someone crying, don't ask if it's because of their haircut. Now, somebody this week questioned the use of the word there. and said surely it should be his or her haircut. But in modern English, we often use the possessive pronoun their as a singular pronoun when we do not know if the person we're talking about is male or female, to prevent us having to say he or she does his or her with him or her and all that kind of thing, repeating it all the time. We often use they, them, their, even if we're referring to a singular. If you look in an older grammar book, maybe 30 years ago, this was a very bad thing to do. People used to get very angry about it, but we do it all the time these days. So that explains why we use their haircut when we're only talking about one person. Now let's look at that little pronunciation problem. Here's something. When we make a past tense, we add the ed. Usually we will not hear the e there, except if you have a word like need or want that ends in a d or a t, then you will hear the past tense as needed, wanted. It's a sort of a id sound there. Needed, wanted, because those words end in d and t. Usually the e is not sounded, so you will only hear the d sound, as in loved or logged. Occasionally the d at the end might sound more like a t. Now this isn't something you have to do, but you might find that when you get accustomed to speaking English, this will naturally happen. And it's to do with the preceding sounds again. So if you look at a word like loved, you've got a v there, love. And logged, you've got a g sound. Both of those sounds are called voiced consonants. Okay, if you want to know more about voiced consonants, I've got lots of videos that I've done on those kind of things. So usually, as there are so many voiced consonants, the D on the end probably sounds like a D, D. However, after certain sounds, here we have some unvoiced consonants. You can see there are not so many. After these sounds, the D sounds more like a T, because actually the T is the unvoiced version of the D. So we have loved with a D, but laughed with a T, laughed. Logged has a D because it's coming after the G, but locked. You hear how locked has a T on the end after the K sound because the K is unvoiced. Laughed, locked. Okay, so sometimes it might sound more like a T. But the thing to remember, the most important thing, is don't pronounce the E unless your base word ends in a D or a T. So that's a little pronunciation problem I noticed last week with a couple of people. Now I think it's time for Celebrity Guest Speaker.
Change is a constant part of life, even if we often resist it. On a personal level, it can be slow and almost invisible. We wake up one day and realize that our habits, priorities, or even our way of thinking have shifted over time, often without us noticing. Some personal changes are intentional. People decide to improve their health, learn a new language, or change careers. These decisions require effort and discipline, and the results are usually gradual. Even small daily actions can lead to significant long-term transformation. physical appearance is one of the most visible signs of change. As we age, our bodies reflect the passing of time. Hair turns gray, skin changes, and energy levels may decrease. While some people find these changes difficult to accept, others see them as a natural part of life and focus on the advantages that come with experience and maturity. Change is not only individual, it also affects the places where we live. Towns and cities are constantly evolving. New buildings appear, old ones disappear, and neighborhoods can completely transform over time, sometimes losing their original character. This gentrification can improve infrastructure and attract new businesses, but it also pushes out long-time residents who can no longer afford to live there. For some, these changes represent progress. For others, they mean loss of community, identity, and familiarity. On a broader level, societies change in response to technology, cultural shifts, and global events. These transformations can create opportunities, but they can also generate uncertainty. It is natural for people to feel uncomfortable when the world around them changes too quickly. Resistance often comes from a desire for stability and a fear of the unknown. However, change is inevitable. Whether we accept it or not, it continues to shape our lives. Learning to adapt while holding on to what truly matters may be one of the most important skills we can develop.
Okay, and now it's time for the incredibly complicated grammar. So I've put the two flashing diamonds in the corner to warn you that this is not for everybody. If you don't understand it, do not panic. This is something we've seen before. Fred built a house for Bob. Or I can say Fred built Bob a house. I can do this with the verb build. So a house is the direct object, Bob is called the indirect object. And with a verb like build, I can move the indirect object, Bob, to a position after the verb and then add the direct object. So I can say Fred built Bob a house. The preposition has disappeared. You see, there is no for in the second sentence. So those two sentences, Fred built a house for Bob and Fred built Bob a house, are exactly the same in meaning. You can choose which way to do it. I recommend, if in doubt, use the first one, okay? Because not all verbs work in the same way. If I take another sentence like Fred constructed a house for Bob, you see the structure of that sentence is the same as the first one. But I cannot do that same procedure. I cannot say Fred constructed Bob a house. I'm not allowed to do that because the verb construct is not in the same category as the verb build. Usually, if we do this movement of moving the indirect object, this can only be done with very small verbs, usually Old Germanic verbs. So if you see a big verb like construct that looks quite Latin, looks a bit like a Spanish verb, then you can't do it. This is why the first structure of a sentence is probably better because you know you can do it with whatever verb. But the structure of Fred built Bob a house can only be done with some verbs. I'll give you another example. I can say Fred baked a cake for Bob, or I can say Fred baked Bob a cake. Both can be done because the verb bake again is in that category of verbs which will play this little game. However, if I say Fred decorated a cake for Bob, I cannot say that in another way because decorated is not one of these verbs. So Fred decorated Bob a cake is not permitted because decorated is far too Latin. And doesn't it look like a Spanish verb? Yes. Bake doesn't look like a Spanish verb, does it? So we can do it with bake. We can't do it with decorate. Now, that's quite complicated. I think you'll agree. I'm going to take it to another level of complication. Fred took a photo to Bob. This take is when you carry something and you transport it from A to B, you take it to somewhere or to somebody. Okay, like taking your books to school. If I take a photo to Bob, I pick up the photograph, I go to Bob's house and say, "Here you are, Bob, here is a photo for you." So that sentence can then be transformed to the second sentence. Fred took Bob a photo. That means the same as Fred took a photo to Bob. Now look at the last sentence. Fred took a photo of Bob. In this one, he is taking a photograph and the person in the photograph is Bob. Bob is the subject of the photograph. Taking a photo of Bob is not the same as taking a photo to Bob. And that transformation of the sentence has already been done with to Bob. So if I want to say Fred took a photo of Bob, I can't do the same transformation. I can't say Fred took Bob a photo because I've already used it with the to example. So what have we learnt here? Not only are there two categories of verbs, there are the verbs that can do this transformation, and then there are the long Latin-based verbs with which we cannot do the transformation. We also have to be very careful of the preposition that we are eliminating when we do the transformation. So take to, we can do the transformation. Fred took Bob a photo. But take of, we cannot do that transformation because we've already used it with take to. So if I say Fred took Bob a photo, it can only mean one thing. It means he transported the photo to wherever Bob is. It's not taking a photo in which Bob is the subject. Here's another example. Fred bought a book for Bob. Or I can transform that bought for, eliminate the for, do the transformation. Fred bought Bob a book. However, if Bob is selling the book and I say Fred bought a book from Bob, I cannot do the transformation. Bought for, I can do the transformation. Bought from, I can't do it. Fred painted a picture for Bob. I can remove the for and I can say Fred painted Bob a picture. However, if I paint a picture of Bob in which Bob is the image in the painting, I cannot do it with paint of. I can only do it with paint for. This is something I've never seen in a grammar book. I've only recently noticed it in the last few years, and I've just been noticing a few more examples like these. So it's something I need to look into, and I'll get back to you when I find more of them. And there you have it, a very complicated grammar lesson. So complicated that I had to remove the slow TV background as an aid to concentration. That's the end of the programme for this week. Next week we'll be discussing the topic of writing, unless of course you're in the Friday groups, in which case next week you'll be discussing the topic of change and the rest of us will be discussing writing. So, have a good week. Till next week.